Well, the morning that 538 shut down, Ruth emailed me and was like, is there anything I can do? And I was like, well, whatever. Like, I'm not going to get a job at the New York Times. They have the people they need.
Don't say that.
Although, New York Times, if you're listening.
I have no pull whatsoever, but
so I was like, Ruth, I'm going to start an indie podcast. And when I come to you, just say yes, just come on the podcast. Like, that's all I need from you. And she was like, done. So
I am.
You've been ready.
I've been ready, just ready to jump into that double dutch. Like, I'm here. Let's go.
Well, you picked a good podcast to come on because we've got a very
You were very excited about this game. You're raising the expectations are very high right now.
Well, so. there's just
listeners
one question.
Get excited.
There's just one question in particular that I nearly shit my pants just writing. I was like, you have got to be kidding me. This cannot be real.
Okay.
I can't wait for you to giggle while you're saying it. It's gonna be great.
We'll know which one it is.
Okay. Well, now that the suspense is killing you, we should get into it. Hello and welcome to the GD Politics Podcast. I'm Galen Drew. The polls did pretty well in 2024, particularly on the measurement of overall error. On the direction of error, though, things weren't quite as good. For the third presidential election in a row, they underestimated Republican support. By now, you know my spiel about why even imperfect polls are still one of the best ways for us to understand the world and the people around us. But that means that in this challenging time for polls especially, it's more important than ever that public opinion researchers self-reflect and try new things and make improvements. And that is exactly what happened last week in St. Louis, Missouri, at the annual conference of the American Association of Public Opinion Researchers. The people behind all these polls gathered to share their lessons learned from the past year.
And drink.
And drink. We'll get to that. But that is what we are going to talk about today. We're also, on the topic of polls, going to take a closer look at President Trump's current approval rating and, at the end, play a game based on a new survey of what Americans think about the world's best-known companies. For example, which do Americans view more positively, the Trump Organization or X, formerly known as Twitter? Stay tuned and you will find out. Here with me to do it all are two dear friends of the podcast, Nathaniel Rakich. Welcome back to the pod.
Thanks, Galen.
And for the first time ever on the GD Politics Podcast, Ruth Igelnik, polling editor at the New York Times. Ruth, welcome. It's so good to have you. It has been too long.
Thank you. Yes, I am thrilled to be here. This is exciting.
So you were both at the APOR conference last week, as it's called. So you have the most up-to-date information on the state of the polling industry. I think is this the only podcast in the world where you could do an episode pegged to a polling conference?
Certainly, if not the only, one of the only. Maybe Marist has you neck and neck on that one.
Does Marist have a podcast?
Oh, they do.
Oh, okay. I gotta give it a listen.
Before we get to any of the conference chatter, I want to talk about a piece that you recently wrote, Ruth, in the New York Times, and it's titled, "One Thing Helping Trump's Approval Rating, Some People Are Not Paying Attention." What do you mean by that, Ruth?
This is a really interesting finding. Obviously, Trump's approval ratings are historically low, but sort of underpinning it is this really interesting thing where about 40% of the people who approve of Trump are not paying attention to the news. And we asked attention to news in a lot of different ways because it's a really complicated thing to measure. People always overreport that they're paying attention to the news. But I was really interested in this idea of people paying attention to specific news events. So we asked, for example, about the man from Maryland who was mistakenly deported to a prison in El Salvador, Kilmar Abrego Garcia. If people were paying attention to news about that, and the more you were paying attention to news about that, the less you approved of Trump's immigration policies. And put another way, the less you were paying attention to news about that, the more you approved of Trump's immigration policies. So it really was this idea that a lot of people who approve of Trump, a little under half of people who approve of Trump, just aren't paying attention to the sort of day-to-day news.
I have to ask, which way does the causality run? The type of people who don't pay a lot of attention to the news, are they more likely to support Trump? So, even
Yep.
if you tell them about a story that they didn't hear about, like this man from Maryland case, they'll still support Trump. Or is it the case that they support Trump because they haven't heard the news, and if you inform them, they'll change their minds?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think, honestly, one, it's hard to tease out, but I think it kind of goes both ways. I mean, we know that Trump's victory was underpinned by these low information voters who weren't paying a lot of attention, who don't participate in elections. At the same time,
don't participate in elections that often. I guess
that
they have
often,
to participate in at least one election.
Yeah, but aren't regular participants in election. We look at people who say voted in one of the last 4 elections, none of the last 4 elections, 4 of the last 4 elections. And I think we sort of over-index on people who are regular voters. When we talk to people, it's so many high-educated people. But the truth is, 60% of voters don't have a college education. A lot of voters aren't paying attention. And a lot of voters don't vote regularly in election. And by voters, I mean registered voters. A lot of people don't vote. So it does go that direction. But I also think some of it we did see go the other direction. So, for example, I was kind of interested in these groups were sort of a little bit demographically different. So this is a true wonky in the weeds, didn't make it into the article, but listeners might be interested in. I ran a regression to try to control for the differences between those groups to see if there was still a difference in approval for Trump, controlling for differences in partisanship, differences in where they got their news, all of these things that we think might contribute to a higher approval for Trump sort of inherently. And when I controlled for those things, there was still a difference between these groups, which tells me that it's real and it's not just a correlation.
Okay, so you take two, I'm just going to ID myself, like white college-educated male in their 30s. One is paying attention to the news and one is not paying attention to the news. The one who's not paying attention to the news has a higher approval rating of Trump.
Right. And controlling for all the things that might make you guys different, that's still that difference in their approval of Trump is going to be related to their news attention, which is really interesting.
There is something like civically minded, politically minded, though, about consuming news. So it could be that specific thing really is the driver. Like, I'm the type of person who doesn't really like to consume news. That also makes me the type of person who kind of likes Trump. They could just be linked.
They are linked to each other. And again, you may be limiting your news environment. You may be watching news that doesn't cover these stories. I mean, there are a lot of ways in which you could be different and make yourself different. And so some of that is like it directionally goes both ways. But I still think it's really interesting because I think a lot of people who read the New York Times, who listen to your podcast are thinking, gosh, I'm seeing all these things that Trump is doing. How are people okay with this? And the truth is, a lot of people aren't seeing those things. Now, they might still be okay with it. We don't know. They might still be okay with it, even if they are seeing those things. But the kind of interesting piece is they are not seeing. We asked about, very sort of specific things to kind of control for the fact that everybody says they pay attention to the news. So we asked about specific cases. We asked about whether you're paying attention to the stock market, government cuts, all of these things to try to get at more specific answers, which was helpful from a methodological standpoint to kind of tamp down the percent of Americans who overreported paying attention to the news. But that's when we found this interesting finding.
I want to talk a little bit more about the stock market and the economy in particular. But first, I want to backtrack for a second. So Trump's approval rating has been improving lately. Around the 100-day mark, he hit a low of net negative 10 or so. And since then, as he's relented on the tariffs and the market has bounced back, his approval rating has also gone up. Now, it depends which average you look at.
Let me push back on that.
He has improved. Oh, okay. Wait, there's disagreement that he has improved or that it's linked to the market.
Yeah, that it's linked to the market, but also that he has improved, which is what I'll say is, one, we haven't had a lot of high quality surveys in the last several weeks. But when you look at high quality surveys that were taken during that low period and taken again now, there's actually not a real difference. So some of that uptick is coming from some lower quality surveys. I don't dispute that it is going up. I just think we need more higher quality surveys to kind of build in some truth to that, really understand whether it's durable or whether it's kind of a little bump.
Okay, call me out, Ruth. That's what we're here for. But I was actually going to call out some disagreement amongst the averages. So if you consider that net negative 10, I think there was quite a bit of agreement that was where the low landed across the different averages. But if you look now, so the Real Clear Politics average shows Trump at net negative 2. Nate Silver's average shows Trump at net negative 4. The Times' average shows Trump at net -6, and Elliot Morris, our former colleague's average, shows him at net -8. So it's kind of a choose your own adventure out there. And Nathaniel, this is where I'm going to put you on the spot. You're on a desert island. You can only bring one Trump approval average with you. Which one are you bringing?
I'm bringing the one that has a radio, Galen.
Which is that a long way of saying you're not going to answer this question?
Yes. Well, I mean, I will say that, yeah, there are methodological differences in various polling averages. I will say that Real Clear Politics is the one that is kind of the most simple, which is to say it doesn't adjust for a lot of things like pollsters' house effects and like kind of, which is basically the tendency of certain pollsters to have particularly good results for one party or the other. It's also it's not quite clear to me how they choose which polls to include in the average, whereas the other sources are are a little bit more, at least, transparent about it. The Times is, fairly selective in the polls that they use, but they use high quality polls, and Elliott's and Nate's averages are more comprehensive. I think that, it's basically, we can't know. There is not going to be an answer to the question of like, oh, today, May 21st, Donald Trump's approval rating is exactly 44.6%, right? That's not an answerable question. I think any of the averages that have the more rigorous methodology are basically fine.
Nathaniel, why don't we go into business together averaging the averages? You know what I mean?
Whoa.
Whoa.
That's a thought.
That's through the looking glass.
So, Ruth, I know that you probably have to defend the Times' methodology here. No, you're going to come. Oh, yeah. Make some news. Come on the podcast. Trash your company.
No, all of which is to say what I was going to say is the truth is no matter which one you select, as Nathaniel said, the point estimate isn't actually a thing, right? We can't say what that number is. The trend is what's interesting.
Yeah.
So if they're all showing this kind of downtrend and then a little bit of an uptick, like that to me says, like, you can't get to truth. You can't put these all together and get to truth. But looking at the trend, they're all telling a similar story. Whether he's above ground or underwater, I actually don't think that matters a ton. It's all about if it's moving in the upward direction or moving in the downward direction.
I mean, well, I wouldn't go that far. It does matter, like the kind of rough area in which he finds himself in, right? Yeah. Like if he is at -20 net approval rating but trending up, that's not necessarily great.
True.
Like, but like
better
I think
than trending down.
That's true, sure. The derivative is important, but to bring some calculus into the equation. But I think that people don't need to get super hung up. I know obviously people do. And Donald Trump is going to pick the best numbers for him and Democrats are going to pick the worst numbers for him. But you don't need to get super hung up about whether it's -6 or -8 or what have you. I think it's just important to know that it is slightly underwater. But I do think it is important, kind of for democracy and kind of our analysis of, and for, Donald Trump himself to assess, if he wants to, the popularity of his policies and change course accordingly. It's important to know whether those policies and his overall performance is above water or below water, or roughly even in the case of if it was a disagreement of +1 versus -1.
And I will say, I mean, in defense of our average, I will now speak out and defend our average. As Nathaniel said, I think we're fairly inclusive. I think there's only one poll that we don't include, which is consistent with what 538 had done. Okay. We borrowed that rule from you guys.
Name them, Ruth. Name them.
But Rasmussen borrowed from 538 when we were using your data to underpin our averages in the beginning. We do weight higher quality pollsters differently. That's where we're different. We have what we call select pollsters that are transparent about their methods, historically accurate. We have this kind of, we put it all on our website, this kind of checklist that you can go through to become a select pollster. And so I think that's where, if you take a step back, like I said at the beginning, if you just look at high quality polls and look at on any individual poll level, time 1 and time 2, mid-April to now, you're not seeing a ton of movement. A lot of that movement is coming from some of these less transparent, lower quality polls, which is why I'm waiting to see if it's durable. I think there's the beginning of something. I think it's interesting to watch. I'm not sure whether it's durable or just kind of an uptick right now.
I want to combine these two threads that we're pulling on, which is the lower information voters and Trump's approval overall. Because to me, what happened in mid-April with Liberation Day is, if there's going to be anything that sort of breaks through to low information voters, it's something like that. I mean, folks who track this were charting some of the highest rates of negative news reports on the economy. The stock market was tanking. And even if you aren't invested in the market, which is like 40+% of Americans, you still might hear about it, or it might make you feel a bit of uncertainty. You could still see this kind of stuff on TikTok. It's easy to track. Like, the market is crashing. Okay, I understand what that is. You don't have to get into legal theories behind what it means that, the guy was deported to an El Salvadorian prison. Like, this is pretty cut and dry. Did that break through? Because to me, the story that I would have told myself before talking to you, Ruth, is this is the kind of story that breaks through. Even low information voters are hearing this stuff. And that's why you're seeing some movement in the polls.
No, I think the markets and tariffs did break through more. I think some of the immigration-related individual stories like Abrego Garcia did not break through. We saw that fewer people said that they were paying attention to them. But I do think there's a version of the story that you can tell yourself that those low information, kind of swingy voters are what's kind of swaying this. They were kind of losing, approval for Trump when a lot of the stock market volatility, tariffs were coming into play, and maybe some of that is coming back as it's out of the news. You could easily tell a version of that story. And I think as we get more high quality polls, we might be able to bear that out. Because I know Quinnipiac, for example, when you looked at their Trump approval kind of midway through his presidency and then at that 100-day mark, all of the losses were from independents, which is like another proxy for those kind of low information voters. It's an imperfect proxy, a deeply imperfect proxy, but we don't have an exact proxy in a lot of these things. And I would be interested to see, I'm guessing if you look back, he would have gained some of those people back.
In order to do your analysis on low information voters, you had to reach a bunch of low information voters. And we're going to get into this in the next segment, but that's one of the biggest challenges for pollsters. So how did you even find these folks? How did you make sure that you were including them in your poll?
Yeah, I mean, for this, we didn't do anything special to reach low information voters, but that's been a goal of ours for the past year. And that, as we'll talk about, was a big theme of the APOR conference. This is a group that we know we all struggle with, we all being all pollsters. We, the New York Times, put a lot of effort into reaching low information voters always. So we didn't do anything special for this particular analysis because it was a survey that covered a lot of different topics. But we have spent the last year really trying to make sure, because we could see early indications in our polls pre-election that Trump was doing especially well with these low, I mean, in that case, it wasn't low information, but like low participation voters who hadn't voted in 2020, maybe hadn't voted in other previous elections. Like, we saw a lot of Trump's strength coming from there. So that's been a goal for us all year. And I'm happy to talk about some of the things we've done to try to be better at reaching those people.
Okay, well, let's dive into the APOR section of the podcast in that case. I actually talked to both of you last year after this conference. And one of the reasons that I had FOMO in that instance was because Nathaniel's like usually not that much of a drinker, but I heard through the grapevine that last year he let loose a little bit.
Did I?
So before we get into the numbers,
is that a nice way of saying that I got sloppy at APOR last year?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't remember that.
That's what the gossip.
Neither do I,
said.
but perhaps for different reasons.
So Nathaniel, was there any like dancing on the bar this time around?
Not that I recall, Galen. We did go to some nice bars in Ruth's hometown of St. Louis.
Yes.
No, but it was good. I think it was a little bit of a more muted conference, partially because historically there have been a lot of like census people who have been at the conference, and this year I think presumably for obvious reasons because they either don't have jobs anymore or they don't have money to go. There weren't as many of those folks, so it felt a little bit smaller. There was definitely some. I think there was a sense of we kind of dodged a bullet last year with 2024. Could have gone a lot worse, but also like continued trepidation about like, like I feel like there's a sense of like we're running like as an industry and like just trying to stay ahead of the problem of, trying to measure Trump voters, and we are staying ahead of it, but we got to still keep running. So yeah, but it was a good time. We had a lot of toasted ravioli, a lot of Emo's pizza.
Toasted ravioli?
Oh, it's a St. Louis delicacy.
You don't know about toasted ravioli?
No.
Oh yeah, it's like the
delicious.
thing that St. Louis is known for. It's not that good.
I know,
but
I love it because it's near and dear to me. But it's meat stuffed ravioli that's been fried.
Right.
It's
it would be
delicious.
so much better if it was cheese, like which I did have a cheese version.
Controversial
but the
opinion.
traditional version is beef.
Disagree. I feel beef through and through.
It's just like a beef empanada, which is like fine, but like
I love a beef empanada.
yeah, but like it's even better are like fat mozzarella sticks.
Wait, I was trying to get the goss on like what. Okay, so I sometimes give talks at conferences, and someone needs to write a style piece or, whatever. This is just my opinion. That no, professional conferences are the place where people over the age of 30 with kids have the most fun in America. Like, people get messy. Like, yeah, it's about the presentations and whatever, but like, people out in the hallway, chit-chatting, people skip the sessions. After the sessions, everyone is drinking. Like, there is, like, professional conferences are crazy.
See, Nathaniel says he doesn't remember, but I have the receipts. I have photos. Subscribe to this podcast, and you can be on our friends' channel. I will send you those photos. I'm just kidding.
You have photos?
Bruce, send me those pictures. I'll put them in the subscriber only chat.
I'm frantically trying to remember, like, when were there photos?
I'm kidding. There are no photos. Okay. It's probably of you talking to somebody about low information voters in a bar.
Well, no, in all seriousness, like what is nice about that is like, yes, it absolutely. It's like basically like a 3-day like retreat or like summer camp for grownups, and like grownups who like all share a very nerdy specific interest. Yeah. So like it was absolutely true, right? The conference was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And like every one of those nights, like obviously normally I'm not going out like drinking on like a Wednesday, but like we went like, I would go out with,
went
with
hard.
Ruth. I mean, basically,
at APOR.
Like, that we went to like, the hotel bar, but like people are having these like very intense conversations about like, oh, this presentation today was like super interesting, or like I had a problem, like I disagreed with that, and like kind of like talking about the problems of the industry. And like these are the kinds of ways in which information is shared, right? And like we hopefully iterate and improve as an industry. So
love it. Okay, so Ruth, Nathaniel, grab your beers, grab your cocktails. We're gonna imitate.
I had an ice cream martini. That was the best thing that I had.
Nathaniel, don't do that to yourself.
We told
We're
you
too
it was
old
nerdy.
For that. We're too old.
No, we're not, Galen. Maybe you are.
Wow. That was harsh. I'm going to get my Botox done later today, which is now that I have an LLC, a tax write-off. See my face? It's on the screen. It's a business expense.
That's actually totally fair.
Get those laugh lines in now because they're all going to disappear.
Oh yeah. Enjoy this because it's gone next week. This all of this facial expression, no more. Okay.
Okay.
In the spirit of recreating the bar at APOR, you have your ice cream cocktail, Nathaniel. Ruth, what's your drink of choice?
I do not have an ice cream cocktail. I have an old fashioned. That's much better.
Okay, yeah. There you go. A real Midwesterner right there.
That's right. Hearty.
And I've got my scotch on the rocks. Nathaniel, we're all listening attentively. What were your main takeaways from the conference?
Well, I had several. How many do you want me to go into?
Start with, you do 3, then Ruth, you do 3, and we'll sort of like dig into some overlaps and whatnot.
Okay. I think the 3 takeaways were, one was there was a lot of discussion about waiting to recall vote, which if people listened to the 538 Politics podcast will recall was a big debate before the election. And that's basically this idea of, well, we are trying to get Trump voters and we keep on coming up short. How about we weight our poll to make sure it includes the correct proportion of Trump voters from, say, 2020, or the correct proportion of Republicans from the 2022 election or something like that. And that did seem to make polling more accurate overall in 2024, but there are obviously still questions about the sustainability of that in the long run, because it's a little bit tautological, right? Second, I think there were a lot of people who just like shared their kind of polling findings from 2024 about like the Trump coalition and who is in it. And these are things that we've talked about, of course, a lot, like with, the movement of Latinos toward Trump, young voters toward Trump, especially like kind of like young voters of color was a kind of a big focus of a couple of sessions. Our friend Amelia Thompson DeVoe, who now runs AP Votecast, did a good presentation on that. And there were some interesting tidbits about problematizing whether those people are going to stick around in the Trump coalition, which we can talk about if we want to. And then I think the third thing was, for me, there were a lot of discussions about kind of meta discussions about the trust in polling and what we can do to improve trust and understanding of polling among kind of the general public, which of course is very near and dear to our heart as 538. That's what we were trying to do. There was one study that really stuck with me that basically analyzed the methodology sections of various pollsters and found that they were, unsurprisingly, at like something like a 13th grade reading level on average, and were just really chock full of jargon. And they did this experiment where they showed certain people the methodology sections and then showed other people a really kind of dumbed down version of the methodology section that was basically like, we did a poll, we called 500 people. And like didn't include a lot of your, kind of stuff about like non-probability, like post-stratification, the things that we as kind of industry professionals think are like really important. And we basically found that the people who read the dumbed down version were more likely to trust the poll. They were more likely to take polls in the future. And basically it was really interesting to me because I think a lot of what we think right now about like, transparency good might actually be harming polling in the public eye, or at least making it seem more inscrutable.
Nathaniel's last point is a really great one. And I thought that Nathaniel and I had a great discussion about this on the plane back, actually. We had a nice little murderer's row of pollsters. Scott Clement from the Washington Post was also sitting with us. But I think it's such a good point about what we think of as transparency may not actually work. And one of our colleagues from the polling firm SSRS made a really good point that when we talk about sort of the basic tenet of polling about it being random, actually there's been some cognitive testing that shows that people think like, that's not a good thing. We think of it as a good thing, but they think like it's just random. You're not even trying to talk to the right people. You're just like randomly doing it. And so how we think about the words that we use that we think demonstrate, that build trust, that demonstrate what we're doing, that are transparent, in fact, may have the opposite effect.
So is the idea that when a pollster calls, they're explaining what they're doing in lay terms, or just like when you're on TV news being like, we have the results of a poll, instead of saying like, this is a random sample, a probability-based sample of, 1,000 people, you say, we did a poll, it was very intentional, and we talked to 500 people, and this is what they said, and to leave out that gobbledygook.
The latter, yeah.
Got it. Okay, Ruth.
Okay.
What were your takeaways?
My themes and takeaways. I mean, obviously they overlap with Nathaniel's because we attended the same conference, and the themes were similar. I think my main one was what we talked about with my piece, and it came up again and again in the conference, this idea of how to reach these low propensity voters, these low information voters, these very swingy voters. I saw a lot of presentations about how to do that and a lot of sort of creative ways to attack that problem, because as Nathaniel said, on the one hand, there was a little bit of a pat ourselves on the back that we as pollsters didn't have a disastrous year. On the other hand, we've repeated the same error in the same direction. And so I felt like there was a sort of the under feeling of the conference was a concern that it's only a matter of time and we need to keep trying to fix these problems because we haven't solved them, we haven't fixed them. So hearing a lot of people try different techniques was really interesting. One of my favorites was from our colleagues at CBS and YouGov, where they tried to do completely non-political surveys. So asking about entertainment, and they allowed people to opt in if they'd prefer to talk about entertainment, and then asking them a political question at the end actually yielded better results. So not bogging people down with all of these survey questions, because we know these low information, low propensity, low participation voters, maybe they don't want to talk about politics for 15 minutes. So I think that was a big theme for me, is hearing a lot of pollsters trying to tackle, like that felt like a lot of times I worry in polling that we are fighting the last war. And this was one small place where I felt like we might be looking to the future. I still worry we're not looking to the future enough, but that was a place where people were projecting forward. My second theme was the same as what Nathaniel said, that waiting by past vote was everywhere. Everybody had tried it. Everybody was talking about it. I felt like it wasn't the silver bullet. It didn't help, but it didn't hurt. And I worry about some of the challenges, but it was certainly a theme of the conference.
There were a lot of people who came down pretty clearly in favor of waiting to recall vote, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
I want to have this debate.
Yeah.
But Ruth, get your last
theme,
takeaway in, and then we'll dive in.
My third theme was that I felt like there were a lot of people who were trying new things, a lot of experimentation with new methodologies, which was good in that people were trying new things, but then kind of concerning because nothing really stood out as exceptionally good or exceptionally bad, which is challenging as we think about the path forward for polling. I was pleased that everybody was trying something different. We saw a lot of long-time kind of gold standard pollsters trying unique and innovative things, which was a great theme through the conference, but also that none of them really stood out or were leaps and bounds above the other.
I want to get on my soapbox for a second here related to this, Ruth, which is like, if people hear, pollsters were trying different things and nothing really stuck out, it's because the problem that pollsters are trying to solve in some ways runs a lot deeper than polling. It's a problem that confronts American politics and life, which is a decline in trust and civic engagement. All right, we're going to leave the preview of this episode there. If you want to listen to the whole thing, it's about an hour long. We talked plenty more about what ails polling and how to fix it, and had some fun playing a game. You want to listen to that whole episode, go to gdpolitics.com and become a paid subscriber. You can connect your account to Spotify and Apple Podcasts and never miss an episode of GD Politics. To do that, go to gdpolitics.com and become a paid subscriber today.